over the last year or so, I've been on the hunt for the perfect daily driver. The S4 tends to kind of tick all the boxes. You have the 6-speed, you have a V8, all-wheel drive, and this one in particular is a wagon. Now, with most platforms, there's always a gotcha, and with these, it's always talked about as the timing chains. They are on the back of the motor, sandwiched in between the transmission, and they're impossible to get to. They cost many thousands of dollars. On the low end, $3,000 if you do it. If you bring it to somebody else, you're talking about $6, $7, $8, sometimes $10 or even $12,000. These cars, they're worth $5, $6, $7. If it's an Avant, maybe $10, $12, $15. So you're talking about the whole value of the car just for one big gotcha that they have. A lot of platforms, they have issues like this, or they have gotchas, but sometimes it's hit and miss, sometimes they're kind of overstated. But with these cars, unfortunately, it's a 100% failure ratio. It's just a matter of when, or is it going to be with you or the next owner? And I had the pleasure of experiencing this firsthand with my B7 that I bought earlier in the year. Obviously, when you buy a new car, what do you do for the first thing? You go home and change the fluids before you drive it, because who knows, it could have been 7 years since somebody changed the oil last. So after I changed the oil, I started it up to pull it off the lift, and guess what happened? The timing chain rattled. And then the car started misfiring, and that's basically the indication that your timing chain is gone, or one of the guides has failed. So here we are, second day owning a B7 S4, and the engine is on the floor. Typically when you see a failure with these cars, it's either this black guide right here or the one up here. But I was lucky and had mine fail right on the tensioner for the right hand bank. If you look closely, you'll see there's no plastic on the guide, and metal on metal is not great. So lucky me, before I even get to drive the car, I drove it off the trailer, changed the oil, pull it out, and the engine already has to come out. So I was already off to a pretty rough start. After pulling the engine on that, I replaced the timing, I did the clutch, I did everything you could do. And these cars' other issue is they tend to burn oil, whether that be through bore scoring, which is a pretty big issue, or valve stem seals. They lose a lot. So after pulling my engine on my B7, doing the timing chain, the clutch, everything else that's associated with that job, I actually got it running, and it ran well for a while. Even though it burned a little bit of oil, probably a quart every 300 to 400 miles, which is pretty normal for these cars, unfortunately, I actually decided that I wanted an Avant. Although it's the same car, just with a little bit of extra metal and a little bit of extra glass on the back, it was enough that I figured I would sell my perfectly just finished car just to get something like that. So after the debacle that the other car gave me, you would think I'd be a little bit more cautious about this one, but I am not the brightest in the world, so I went out and bought the first Avant that I saw. But the guy that I bought it off of seemed pretty reputable. He had timing receipts, he had a Volkswagen shop, and he seemed pretty nice on the forum, so I flew out there. It was a couple-hour plane ride, and I had a 10-hour drive back. So the transaction went down, and as I was pulling away, he runs over to me and hands me 10 quarts of oil. Now, this should have been a red flag, but he said it was just extra, so he wanted to let me have it for my drive home. Little did I know that this car had bad valve stem seals, and it burned a quart every 75 to 150 miles. So I get halfway through my drive, and the low oil warning light comes on. With nothing that I could do, I decided to just keep pushing on, top it off every once in a while, and when I got home, just like my B7, the first thing I'm doing is popping the hood and tearing into my engine of a car that I've had for less than 24 hours. So let's go ahead and pop the hood, and I'll show you what everything looks like under there. This being the B6, it shouldn't have the carbon accents if I can remember correctly, and this is also a B7 wheel. But when I sold my old one, I transferred everything over, so I got a nice clean interior. If we pop the hood, you'll see that this is actually a pretty good looking engine, pretty tidy engine bay, and there are also a ton of different variants of this 4.2. This was Audi's workhorse engine. You got this in pretty much any car from the 90s up until I think the mid 2000 teens. There are tons of different variations. You got the 5 valve in this, you have the 4 valve in like the RS4 and the R8. You have the timing belt motor, You have the timing chain motor, and then you have like the turboed model, the high compression, the low compression, the direct fuel injected. They just put this in everything, and the reason being is it's a good motor. Just in this B7 and B6 model, they had a lot of timing chain issues. Now the issues came from the chain guides that are in back. They are made out of plastic, and this plastic, after getting hot and cold and hot and cold and rode on for a while with the chain, just gets fatigued, and they crack and they fall apart, and then your engine explodes. You have valves hitting pistons, and then that's it. So these tend to last, depending on how they're driven, in between 75 and 150,000 miles before they're shot. This one reportedly had its chains done at 130. My old one was at 150. So I don't know how much I can trust that, given the guy sold me a car that was puking oil out the back, but soon we're going to tear into it and see. So here we are, first day of Avant ownership, and we are already tearing the engine apart. I don't know how far this is going to go, but we need to figure out what's going on, why this oil is being burnt. Is it the valve seals? Is it bore scoring? We will find out in just a minute. Now we have the plugs out. I'm going to pop a picture of those up here on the screen right now. You can see that these are probably not been done in quite a while, and the valve covers are definitely leaking down into them. That's kind of a concern, because the owner of this that I bought it from said that the timing was just done, and he also put new plugs in. Those plugs are not new, so this car probably didn't even have timing. I don't know where the pictures that I got of the car that was getting its timing done, but I don't think it's this one. So another win for me. I've had a look inside all these cylinders, so I'm just going to show you this one right here. When I get this down, there you go. You'll notice the piston is pretty wet, and that is not fuel on top, that is oil. Now all of them look pretty bad. They're not exactly the same, some worse than others, so that to me rules out the PCV. And I think these are valve sim seals, because there's a little bit of bore scoring, but I don't think it'd be enough to cause this on every cylinder, unfortunately. I am officially clocked out for the night. I'm pretty pissed off. This is the second S4 I bought this year, and the second time the day of buying them that I learned I have to pull the engine. I sent all this evidence and the bore scopes and all that kind of stuff to the person I purchased it from. We argued for a while, and now he's accusing me of dumping oil down into each one of the cylinders and then bore scoping it to try to prove a point of some sort. Then I ended up doing a one take where I put new plugs in, ran it for a couple minutes, pulled them out, showed him how shitty they look right away, bore scoped it, found oil in there. So I'm not sure how he explains that away, but this is my daily for the time being. I have other cars, but I think I'm just going to try to put it on hold until spring, until I get some of my other stuff done. Then I can pull this engine and do it the right way instead of just trying to scrap it together. It is burning a lot. I'm going to put some stuff in there to try to soften those seals up and just run some cheap oil in there for a while. If the engine blows up, it blows up. I got to rebuild it anyway. So I'm just going to try to squeak as much time as I can get out of this thing. And I don't know.